1. In October it will be 3 years since I came alarmingly close to a real-life horror movie. I took my now ex to the Mohican Cabins in Ohio for our 1-year anniversary. It was beautiful weather and we were staying in a decked-out treehouse in the middle of the woods. I read great reviews about the place and decided it would be a perfect little getaway. We spent the first day just hanging out at the treehouse. We watched movies, sat on the balcony, and did some exploring through the trails. I was feeling very content and looking forward to visiting the town the next day. The next day we went to a few little shops and restaurants, and decided that night we would go to a bar and watch the baseball since we didn't have cable in the treehouse. I kind of had a cold, but figured I'd stick it out and drink a few beers with my boyfriend, so he could watch his favorite team play. We got to the small bar around 8 or so, and immediately didn't feel very welcome. The bartender was sitting with a group of local guys, and it was clear they all knew each other, and were pretty tight. This didn't stop my ex and his ego, though. He walked right up to them and started ordering drinks for us. He also would get up and make the dudes high-five him every time something good happened in the baseball game. I tried to escape his cringe-worthy social attempts by downing a few Blue Moons. To my luck, so I thought, the bartender kept bringing me beers and telling me to help myself. I cut him off pretty quick. I'm a lightweight, and already wasn't feeling so good. A few more guys came into the bar and my ex started telling one of them how we weren't from around there, and we were staying in the tree houses in the Mohican woods. Suddenly I really started feeling dizzy and unwell. I don't know if it was from the cold or from the overwhelming amount of drinks in front of me, but I was ready to go. Also, the bar was starting to empty and I didn't like the vibe I was getting from the people around us. Once we went outside to the car and started driving, we noticed something wasn't right. My ex parked in the Taco Bell across the street from the bar and saw that our tires had been slashed. He starts getting pissed, and I'm half awake at this point. He tells me he's going back to the bar to see if anyone has a tire iron he can use, since his is bent and won't work. Leaving drunk me in the car, he goes back in to find one man sitting at one of the tables. Before my ex says anything, the man creepily says to him, "Little birdie told me you have a flat tire." Creeped out, but wanting to get out of there, my ex asks this dude if he has a tire iron he can use to replace at least one tire. The guy says he has one at his apartment right around the corner, and has my ex follow him there. When he got to this guy's apartment, suddenly he became aware that this was not feeling right. This guy's apartment was full of those big plastic barrels, used to store hazardous waste, and there were just stacks of paper and boxes everywhere. The creepy dude is taking his good old time and saying he just needs to look a few places for the tire iron. Finally, it clicks in my ex's head that he was lured away from the car I was sleeping in. He tells the creep to forget the tire iron and runs back to the car. He turns the car on and drives back to our place, on basically his rims going as fast as he can. There are no streetlights, basically no one else around, and we're driving at like 3 a.m. up a dark road, hoping the car makes it. Once we get back, we realize some people there know where we're staying and could easily find us. Needless to say, we stayed up through the night with a hatchet next to us. First thing in the morning, we called to have our tires changed and got the fuck out of there. I don't know what would have happened if my ex hadn't reached the car sooner, but my mind is telling me that these guys planned to keep him away from me as long as they could, for God knows what reason. Also want to mention, everyone else we met in that town was super nice and welcoming. Don't let this story discourage you from checking the place out. On the other hand, creepy locals from the corner bar, let's not meet. 2. So a few years ago, we went on a church trip to one of our favorite concerts that runs on New Year's Eve to celebrate the new year. Not only is it concerts, it has all kinds of other events and things to do besides the music. Anyways, we decided to go super last minute, and a lot of the hotels in the area were booked. We ended up staying at a rinky-dink little roadside motel, about 30 minutes away from all the events, and pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The entire place was sketchy and made me uncomfortable, but I felt like we could deal with it, so we were separated, boys in a room, girls in a room, and then chaperones. We get into the room and the first thing we notice is a back door. What kind of hotel room has a back door? The chaperones staying next door insist that it's sealed shut. but still let us know if anyone knocks on it, to not hesitate to let them know by knocking on the wall or whatever was necessary. No sooner than 5 minutes later, one of the guys comes to our room and, jealous of our back door, throws it open, proving that it wasn't sealed shut as we were told. We locked it and went about our business. Later that night, around 11:30, 12 maybe, we get back to our hotel and our chaperones tell us to lock the doors because there were men sitting outside drinking, very obviously drunk as they started catcalling us as we went to our room. I didn't think much of it, and slammed and locked the door, which the young girls in our room decided it would be completely okay to always answer without looking first, because, well, why would they be knocking on our door if they didn't know us? Not okay, and I had to explain to them that you should always look to see who it was before opening the door. Late that night, I was woken up by an odd sound, almost like a tapping. I sat up and glanced around the room before I realized someone was knocking on our door. I very quietly got out of bed, careful to move as silent as possible, and went to the door to check the peephole, thinking maybe the chaperones were doing some weird late-night checkup. No sooner than I glanced out, a hand slowly covered the peephole to hide two of the men that had been drinking outside earlier, and my heart started racing. I slowly got back into bed, trying to stay quiet and calm as the knocking continued, only to see a shadow move out of the corner of my eye, and realize there was someone standing outside the back door as well, barely visible through the blurry tinted window. One of the girls I was with woke up too, confused as she looked at me. I used my phone to explain the situation silently, and we both waited, terrified, as we watched the shadows through the windows and hoped they would go away soon. At some point we both managed to fall asleep again, but when I left the room the next morning there was a paper on the ground. In a very shaky, messy handwriting it read, "Seeing your pretty eye was enough." I can still remember that note perfectly, even after I shredded it and flushed it down the toilet to avoid anyone finding out. I was young and stupid. Looking back now, I know 100% I should have went straight to a chaperone and told them what happened. It could have been a very dangerous situation, and I am extremely grateful that I had awoken, rather than one of the young girls who would have opened the door without checking, and also grateful that I triple-checked the doors to be sure they were locked. However, at the same time, it also didn't seem like a big deal to me at the time. Nothing came of it besides extreme paranoia for a while, but all in all, the only long-term effects was a permanent bad feeling and fear of roadside motels. 3. When I was in kindergarten, I met this woman I'll call Mary. Apparently I actually knew her a while before my first memories of her, because she helped out in my Sunday school class. I don't really remember that. It's just what was told to me by her and my mother. The first time I remember meeting Mary was when I was walking through the hall of our church. I knew a lot of the adults there and generally felt safe. I was walking down a hallway when this woman stuck her head out of a supply closet and started talking to me, asking me to come over, and started giving me the whole, "You're a good kid, why don't you help me with something" sort of spiel. And she knew my name without me telling her. I was about 5 or had just turned 6 and particularly aware of stranger danger, but couldn't decide if I should just be creeped out or not. There was this strange lady seemingly hiding in a closet, asking me to come over to her. How was that not sketchy? But this was a church, and the church was supposed to be safe. Somehow she managed to coax me over to the closet. It turned out that she was trying to fill in the birthdays of the kids in my class, so that they could be given little gifts when it was their birthdays, and she assumed that I would know all their birthdays for some reason. When she found out I didn't, she settled for asking me when my birthday was. I got kind of cagey because I knew better than to give out information about myself, and that was one of the specific things my mother had told me not to divulge to strangers. But then she claimed to already know that my birthday's in April. Wrong. In fact, that's about 6 months off. I told her she was wrong, but didn't feel right about telling her the truth. Partly because I felt like her false guess and offers of future birthday gifts was some kind of ploy. But when I wouldn't divulge my real birthday, she called me a liar. and then she threatened to tell all my teachers what a liar I was if I didn't tell her when my real birthday was. That was the point when I ran to go find my mom and explained to her that there was this strange woman in the supply closet who was asking me for personal information and threatening to get me in trouble if I didn't tell her. She came to confront this weirdo, only to realize that they already knew each other. The woman, Mary, was someone who helped out around the church and basically everyone knew her. Mary laughed off my claims and assured my mom that I was exaggerating, and of course she would never threaten a kid with something like that. And my mother believed her. My mom explained the fact that my birthday was indeed not in April, but came away from the conversation with the idea that I was paranoid and just overreacting to someone asking me for my birth month. Either right before that or right after, I had another incident with this woman, but didn't realize at the time that she was the same person. Similar to before, only not in a closet. This woman, Mary, came up and struck up a conversation with me, saying that she knew how much I loved to help out my teachers, and wouldn't I like to be able to help out even more? The obvious answer was yes. Long story short, she was organizing some kind of teachers' conference in this cabin way out in the woods. They weren't allowed to have a lit sign, but she was worried that a normal cardboard sign wouldn't be visible at night. So she had decided that the best solution would be to take one of the little kids from the church, dress them up in an angel costume, and have them stand next to the sign for hours, using a small switch to turn a lit sign on when cars approached, and then turn it off again so that it wasn't by definition a continuously lit sign. This woman should have worked in sales. I did not see anything wrong with this scenario and excitedly went to tell my mother about this fantastic opportunity I'd just been given to help someone. She was much less enthused, pointing out that this would be outside in October, when the average temperature at night is under 55 degrees Fahrenheit. I would be standing outside alone, freezing my butt off, and getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, just to flip a switch so that she could bend the rules about not having an electric sign. There would apparently be no one there to make sure I was safe from wild animals or any human predator, who happened to drive along and spot a random kid out by themselves in the middle of the night. My mom tracked Mary down and gave her a pretty thorough overview of her opinion about the whole thing. Mary said something like, "Well, fine. I can just go get some other kid to do it then." Which prompted my mom to go to the pastor and tell him what this lady was trying to do. He was a nice guy with 3 girls of his own, and put a stop to the whole plan immediately. I could tell Mary was upset with me afterward for having supposedly told on her, and putting an end to this weird scheme of hers, but since I didn't really know her, I didn't care. Of course, after those 2 incidents, all my teachers became a lot more chilly toward me, and one especially tactless woman flat out told me that she'd been warned about me. Come to find out that Mary had gotten her revenge on me for effectively embarrassing her twice, by making good on her threat to tell everyone I was a troublemaker and a liar. Even though, by that point, my mother had already told her that I had been telling her the truth about my birthday not being in April. What a witch. I'd like to say it ended there, but of course it didn't. My family stayed in the area, and she continued helping with various social functions, so inevitably we ran into each other several more times. One of the most outrageous things she ever did. I was 12, and my mother had decided to enroll me in some kind of VBS summer school sort of thing. Surprise, surprise, Mary was the main coordinator. This place was so screwed up. Not perverted or anything, but just the sheer magnitude of poor planning was incredible. Lunches were provided, but it was weird stuff like Go-Gurt and slimy pears that had a texture like raw fish. Basically, all the kids hated everything they served us. On one occasion, I was served SpaghettiOs, and tried to make the best out of it because at least it was better than the pears, only to find out that Mary had slipped gummy worms in before microwaving them, and they had melted into the SpaghettiOs. When she found out I hadn't liked her prank, she ridiculed me for not being able to take a joke, and insisted that I eat it anyways. At some point it had also been decided that the schedule should not be flexible to any degree. All age groups were expected to get something like half an hour outside every day. Bear in mind, the state where this took place has unpredictable, sometimes extreme weather. So this included days when it was pouring rain out, and our breath was fogging up in front of our faces. They'd pitch one of those little event canopy tents, and force us to sit outside under it in little plastic chairs, until our half hour of outdoor play was up. Even this one girl whose father had told the teachers beforehand not to make her go outside because she had a fever. Naturally, she got worse. They called him to come pick her up, and he chewed the teachers out before taking her home. It also included days where the temperature exceeded 100 Fahrenheit. We'd be forced to line up alongside the building, so that we could stand in the shade of the eaves of the roof, because it was physically too hot to be in the sun, and none of us had access to water or sunscreen. I wish I was joking about this. We had 3 kids drop from heat stroke in the same day, and have to be taken by ambulance to the hospital. The sheriff personally came out and gave the teachers a massive tongue lashing, threatening to shut the place down if any other kids came into the hospital from there. Of course, then they decided it was okay to bend their rules, and keep everyone indoors instead of forcing them outside. There is a point to me mentioning all of this, and that is so that you understand the context behind what happened next. My mother was working overtime, and Mary had volunteered to drive me to this summer camp, since she was there every day. On this day, she had her niece and nephews in the back with me. Where this place was, it was out near the edge of town, and mostly surrounded by crop fields which weren't in use. The area had a decent amount of traffic, but there weren't many buildings close by. On the left-hand side of the building, there was nothing but fields for maybe 2 or 3 acres. On the right-hand side, a tiny farmhouse, and beyond that a pawn shop, and then a gas station. So I was in the back of Mary's van with these other kids, and we happened to look out as we're passing the pawn shop, which hasn't opened yet. And there's this scraggly, bearded man stalking around outside with a rifle or shotgun in his hands. Not like, "Gee, wonder if it's open so I can sell my gun," but like he was either the owner and thought an intruder had broken in, or he was the intruder and was in the process of breaking in. We all started telling her in a panic about the guy, and she just tells us to be quiet, and then tells me that she knows I put them up to it, and that when we get there she's going to tell the teachers not to listen to me. That day, inexplicably, the schedule that was never changed unless the sheriff threatened the teachers was randomly changed, so that my class was sent outside immediately instead of later in the afternoon. And the doors to the building were locked so that we couldn't go back inside even to use the restroom. I spent like an hour fearing for my life, because I knew that if that guy robbed the pawn shop and tried to escape on foot, there was nowhere for him to run that had cover except for our building. I even begged to call my mom, and Mary refused to let me anywhere near the phone, saying that my mom had better things to do than be bothered by my stories. So yeah, basically the coordinator of the summer camp changed the whole schedule for the day and locked a bunch of kids outside just to get back at me for, truthfully, reporting seeing a creepy man with a gun nearby. And also forbid me from contacting my parents, which she was never supposed to do. My mom was ticked when she picked me up, and learned that I'd been forbidden from calling her when I felt I needed to, although she didn't realize the full context of the situation until later, when I had the chance to explain it better. It doesn't even end there, although I wish it did, because the last part was the worst series of events that has ever happened to me. I guess it was kind of a perfect storm. From 6 to 10 years old, I had been best friends with this boy, whom I'll call Michael. Not boyfriend-girlfriend, but real, true best friends. I don't think we ever really argued about anything, except maybe his father, who seemed nice but always seemed to try to spin whatever I said into some kind of innuendo so that he could complain about me to my parents. Like getting on my case about having mentioned the term pussy willow once, or claiming that the word putter was grossly offensive, when he knew that was the alternative my parents made me use instead of fart. I got some weird vibes from him, but not enough to warrant his own post. Michael and I were inseparable up until his family decided to move 3 states away, after which they only occasionally dropped in to visit every couple years. When I was 14, they dropped in to visit again, and so one Saturday, I was invited to stay over at the home where they were staying while they were in town to catch up with him. I had also been friends with a girl I'll call Julie who was my age, and Michael had been friends with Julie's younger brother Nate, who was his age. So Julie, Nate, and their parents were also there visiting with Michael and his family. I had grown apart from Julie due to other reasons, but having everyone back together was fantastic. I was on cloud nine all day. Julie's younger brother had been a bit of a handful when he was little. He had temper tantrums, kicked small animals, randomly screamed at me a couple times, and would sometimes cry for no reason while claiming that somebody else had hurt him. He was severely, in my opinion, bullied by his sister, so I never took any of it personally, or really considered it his fault. Since I hadn't seen much of him or his sister in years at this point, I had no idea how he was getting along. But because he was much more grown up, 4+ years had passed, I assumed he'd just grown out of it. That afternoon we all played tag in the front yard, which was sort of a U-shape and surrounded by hedges. At some point, I lost sight of the others. I guess they had gone inside or something. I was at the end of the U that was near the garage door playing fetch with Michael's dog, and this big walking stick, when I heard Julie's mom call my name from the other end of the U, which was near the house's front door. I took the stick because I thought leaving it lying around would be rude, and started running around the U. Apparently when Julie's mom had opened the door and called my name, Nate had darted out the door and came running around the U to come find me. Only he didn't say anything, and I didn't know he was there. We were both closer to the inside of the bend, and when we reached the middle there was no chance to stop. We ran straight into each other. He landed flat on his back and I nearly fell over too. His chin hit me hard in the collar though. We just stared at each other in shock for a second. Finally I reached a hand forward to help him up and ask if he was okay. Immediately his eyes filled with tears. He started screaming, seemingly in pain and in absolute terror, and turned around and bolted back the way he'd came. I knew he had to be bruised at least as badly as me, but was totally confused. The way he was crying, I was afraid he might have broken an arm or a leg or something. But if he was hurt that bad, then how could he run so fast? Or if he was afraid, what was he afraid of? I ran after him, feeling like there was an axe murderer behind me or something. I reached the door, but nobody was there and it was closed and locked. I knocked and Michael's mother answered it. She saw me still holding the walking stick and looked confused but let me inside. I could hear Nate screaming and crying in the kitchen. His mother had him up in the counter and was looking him over, trying to figure out what was wrong with him. She seemed just as confused and scared about the whole thing as I was. And then he saw me, and immediately pointed and screamed, "She beat me with a stick!" He just screamed the same thing over and over. I didn't know what to do, but seeing me seemed to make him hysterical, so I left him with his mother in the kitchen. I wanted to go find Michael and the others, but Michael's mom refused to let me go downstairs where he and the others were, so I just stood by myself in the foyer next to the door and tried not to panic. Maybe Nate hadn't grown out of crying wolf about other people hurting him. But this was way different from what he'd been like when he did that as a little kid. This time he seemed hysterical, and he seemed like he legitimately believed what he was saying. I had been holding the stick when we ran into each other, even though I certainly didn't hit him with it. Maybe he didn't understand what had really happened. I tried to go back into the kitchen, thinking that I should try to explain to his mom what had happened, but Michael's father stopped me. I don't even know where he came from. I must have been really freaked out because from my perspective it seemed like he just appeared in my way. He told me not to go into the kitchen. I tried to explain that I needed to talk to Nate's mother and explained very shakily that Nate was telling her I'd attacked him. So Michael's father asked, "Did you?" I told him no, of course not. He pointed out that I didn't seem to be hurt at all, which I refuted, telling him that I'd gotten my own bruises from running into Nate. He asked for me to show him. I said no. He asked why. I pointed out, unnecessarily I think, that I was a 14-year-old girl, so I couldn't just take my shirt off the way a 12-year-old boy could. He asked me why again, and persisted in stating that I needed to show him, and that if I didn't, he couldn't help me. because I refused to give him any reason to think that I was innocent. This miserable sod who had known me growing up and had allegedly been a close friend of my family for years, and knew that I had never hit another kid in my life, was essentially trying to blackmail me into undressing in front of him. I still feel angry just thinking about it, because the entire time my family had known him, he had always come off as this perfect, kind, and caring father, and he had always found things to nitpick in whatever I said. Even as a first grader who didn't know what sex was, somehow I was allegedly spouting all kinds of innuendo all the time. And now this. I learned as an adult that people who talk excessively about a topic generally do so because it occupies their own mind too frequently, and it makes me wonder if maybe this wasn't his problem all along. If not, I don't know how to explain anything. All I know is that night it was like everyone I knew had gone insane at the same time. But I did say no to him and went into the kitchen, more to get away from him than anything else. Nate's mother was still frazzled, but was starting to seem more exasperated than anything else. Somehow he still hadn't stopped crying. I asked her to please call my mom to come pick me up. That hadn't been the plan. The plan was that I was to stay until after dinner, but I couldn't handle the situation anymore. She could see that I was shaking and agreed. I asked Michael's mother if I could say goodbye to any of the others, but she didn't want me anywhere near them. My mom was tense and quiet all the way home, and I was afraid of what she might have been told over the phone. She asked me once if there was anything I wanted to tell her. I panicked and said no. The next day was Sunday. I habitually stayed with the adults instead of going to the teens class because the teacher, who was coincidentally Mary's husband, picked on me sometimes. In retrospect, I should have spoken up about that, but I was an insecure teen, thought I might be oversensitive, and wasn't really sure how much of what he said could be considered harmless ribbing. The end result was that I didn't see Julie, so I had no idea how the situation with Nate had resolved until after church was over. The phrase "spreads like wildfire" doesn't even begin to fit the bill. It was like everyone had developed telepathy. I overheard part of the story from Nate's mother while she was telling it to Mary. Nate had continued to insist, even after I left, that I had savagely attacked and beat him for no reason. He had some pretty nice green bruises that seemed to back up his claims. I did too, right in my collarbone, shaped exactly like his chin. Nate's mother was completely unnerved by how sincere he seemed, and was torn between believing him because he was so grown up now, because there were those bruises, because he had been legitimately too scared to come to church in case he saw me again, or not believing him because I had seemed so scared too, because she had the decency to remember what kind of a kid I'd been growing up. While I had been there, Julie had told all the girls in my class that I attacked her brother. Michael told me that he didn't know if he believed that I had done it or not, but his parents refused to let him stay in contact with me because they were both certain I was guilty. Julie and Nate's parents had wanted to talk to my mother to try to resolve whatever had happened, because they were willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. But they couldn't find my mom and didn't want to take the time looking for her, because they had left Nate home alone and were eager to get back to him. So instead they told the whole story about what had happened to Mary, trusting that she would convey the whole situation to my mother. That was not what happened. Mary changed the story. Now it was Nate's parents, herself, and Michael's parents, who all knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was guilty, with the added insinuation that it might not have been just an assault, because apparently that wasn't good enough for her. Yeah, she decided to play that card just for the sheer fun of it. By the time I just started to realize that the issue with Nate was still an issue, half the people in the church had already been told about what an awful, despicable person I was. The head of the youth ministry personally sat me down to tell me how unacceptable my behavior was. I had former teachers I hadn't seen since first grade coming out of the woodwork to tell me how disappointed they were in me. Everyone flat out refused to hear my side of the story. They already knew everything, they said. Nothing I said could make up for what I did. Mary had already told them I was a rebellious, lying kid, a troubled child, and has stuck to that story over the years, including during the pawn shop incident. so it seemed like there was precedence. She'd been building off the claims about me for 8 years by this point. Why would anyone believe a lying, rebellious, troubled teenager over a charismatic adult who was always doing her part to help the community? Mary was so disgusted with me, her words, that she refused to speak to me. She specifically told her yarn to everyone but my mother, having learned early on that my mom was not going to stand for baseless rumors and accusations about me. Mary was of the opinion that my mom was in denial about what an awful kid I really was. Mary's husband, my current youth teacher, somehow snowed me into thinking that my mom knew about everything, and that I shouldn't try to talk to her about it, because she was so angry with me she would basically explode on me. I spent the next 2.5 years despised by almost everyone I knew. All the adults I knew were against me except for the pastor, who refused to take sides, and my mother. Mary's husband continued to make snide remarks and insinuations whenever he thought they were vague enough that the other adults wouldn't know what he was talking about. All of the kids I knew who were in my age range shunned me. Even when new kids came in who didn't know any better, they were quickly told to stay away from me, ruining any chance I had of making new friends to replace the ones I'd lost. Even random strangers in the grocery store would glare daggers at me, sneer at me, or just watch me with creepy disapproval. The shyness I'd always had became full-fledged social anxiety, complete with what I suspect was selective mutism, because I was afraid of virtually all the adults I knew, afraid of the little jabs they'd make at me, afraid because I didn't know if my mom knew or not and was afraid to find out. If she knew. If it was true that she was just so indifferent in reality that even though I knew she loved me, for some reason she still let everyone pick on me. It seems so stupid now that I was afraid of talking to her about it. If there were any one thing in my life I would choose to change, I would have told her immediately. But that isn't what happened, so I lived with it by myself. There were some mornings where I would just spend an hour in the shower crying my eyes out, because I didn't want to have to go out and deal with it all over again. I don't know if you'll know what I mean when I say that having other people expect you to feel guilty is oppressive in and of itself. When you laugh or smile or just feel normal, but they believe you should be ashamed of something and don't like it that you aren't. For a while I just tried not remembering what had happened. It is possible to make yourself forget something, but don't ever do that to yourself. Once you have a memory, you can't really destroy it. The best you can do is bury it. Part of your mind will always still know it's there. I still got all the same judgmental looks and hurtful remarks. I just no longer understood why people were acting that way, and I had all kinds of awful nightmares until I finally dug those memories back up and faced them again. I got over it, but slowly. So many people who had known me the entire time I was growing up had immediately assumed the worst just because some gossip had told them to. I never knew who had been told and who hadn't. Every time I thought people had forgotten, Mary's husband would make some new cutting remark, or someone else would, and I'd lose whatever sense of security I'd started to scrape together. It was only in my early 20s, a few years after we'd moved out of state, that I finally found the courage to bring up the subject with my mother, which led to some interesting revelations. It turned out that Nate's mother hadn't divulged anything about what had happened over the phone. My mom had been tense on the drive home because of something totally unrelated to me, and had asked if I wanted to talk not because she thought I was guilty about anything, but because she could tell I was under stress of some kind. Mary's husband had lied through his teeth about her knowing what was going on, or being angry about it. She had never known. That was why Mary's husband had always tiptoed around the subject in her presence, because he knew she didn't know and wanted to keep it that way. It was practically a conspiracy. My mom, the one person who actually had a right to know what had happened, had been denied the opportunity to try to make things right, because everyone else was so busy judging me for themselves. And Nate's parents, the two people who actually had a semi-balanced view of that night, had no idea how bad things had gotten after they left that day, because they didn't live in our area anymore and weren't there to see it. If they had, I'd like to think they would have put a stop to it. They were good people. That's the end, I guess. I don't have nightmares anymore, and I feel more or less indifferent to the situation now. It's over a decade behind me at this point. But Mary and your husband, holy crap. I never want to meet either of you again for as long as I live. All of the stress and fear and heartache I've mentioned here, and that's still not even mentioning how much you badmouthed my mom behind her back, gushed over her cancer scare because it gave you something to gossip over, and generally treated us both like dirt. I never want to meet Michael's father again either because, whether he is a pervert, or just too dense to realize how wildly inappropriate he was being, doesn't really matter at this point. Either way, it was still beyond creepy and wrong. Never meeting Michael again is still kind of painful to think about, but I guess it can't really be helped. I even tried contacting him on Facebook a few years ago, but to no avail. I already know Julie and Nate never want to meet me again. I guess that sort of makes this a round-robin let's not meet. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 326. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, as you all know, I should hopefully, don't want to jinx it, but hopefully I should be relaxing as much as I can this week. There may be a stream at some point during the week, I'm not sure, I might do one on my birthday on the 19th. But we'll see, I'm not certain yet. Okay, and with that I think I'll keep the rest of this short, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.